So I'm going to be talking to you about cloud computing for criminals. Another way of looking at it is my cloud is bigger than your cloud. How about getting to the big one of all? Google. And I'm going to include over here Google, Google Apps, and YouTube in terms of service. I'm also not going to just look at the cloud part of it. I look at the whole system. 500,000 servers, 1 million CPUs, and about 1,500 gigabits or 1.5 terabits per second of bandwidth. Let's look at vendor C. 6,400,000 systems, around 18 million CPUs as best we can tell, 28 terabits of bandwidth, and nicely distributed around the world. Anyone have any idea who that vendor might be? You got it. That happens to be Conficker. Very stable, a year old, just over a year old now. And those are some of the specs. So you begin to now understand that we're actually dealing in a different world. There are clouds out there that you may never have thought of that have more computing power and more bandwidth and are more distributed than anything that you actually have available to you today.
So I got this huge surprise. Somebody sent me a note saying you're going to give Rodney an award. How can that be? He doesn't flash, he's not pretty, he doesn't stand out in front and take all of the credit for everything, he just gets the work done. I haven't had such a pleasant surprise in a week or a month or maybe longer. I'm from ICANN, you understand. My name is Steve Crocker. I've had the pleasure and the privilege of knowing Rodney for a while. I was trying to count up exactly how long, and it's been give or take around a decade. When I was chairing ICANN Security and Stability Advisory Committee, I was introduced to Rodney as one of the guys that I should get to know. And it has been just a pleasurable experience from start to finish. Rodney pioneered the Ultra DNS effort, putting together a service that provided reliable DNS service around the world, and became a very strong player in the network security business, as you know, because you know probably more about him from that point of view than I do. But I have watched firsthand his participation in the development and deployment of the DNSSEC, that's the security overlay for DNS. I have watched his very insightful and forceful participation in combating Conficker and in a variety of other security efforts. He knows all of the right people. His heart is absolutely in the right place, and he is unabashed about taking action where action is required, and he is equally unassuming and uninterested in being out in front. So I think you guys have made an extremely smart decision here. I applaud. I'm sorry I can't be with you, but it is a real pleasure to join in honoring Rodney.
Rodney Joffe, first and foremost, congratulations on receiving the Mary Litynski Award. I'm sure this means a lot to you, but rather than put words in your mouth, what are your thoughts about receiving the award?
When I was first approached by the folks from MAAWG and told that I was being considered for the award, I burst out laughing because very clearly I'm relatively well known. I know a lot of people, but I don't know much. And I assumed that it was a very sophisticated joke. I'm certainly not the right kind of person. I'm way too old. I don't code. I don't do things anymore. I just know a lot of people. But as it's come to pass, it looks like I have been selected for the award, and I'm really honored. I really appreciate the Academy nominating me and selecting me and voting me in. Although, as Groucho Marx would say, I don't know so much about wanting to belong to a club that would accept me as a member. But it's a very, very good group of people who've had the award before, and I'm honored to have been selected. So thank you very much, all of you over there in Ireland. Sorry I couldn't be with you today.
So how did you get involved? How did you start in the anti-spam world, I suppose?
So really started around 1994 during the period when we had the very first of the mainstream spam start. It was actually, as all of you will know, Canton Siegel, Phoenix, when they began the whole process of green card spam. And as one of the backbone ISPs with my company that ultimately became Genuity, that some of you would know, we talked amongst us on the backbone and said, this is really a bad thing. This shouldn't be allowed to happen. And we spent a lot of time talking about it. And by the time we realized what was happening, spam was in full run, and Sanford Wallace was king again and was spamming everyone. And it really made me think of a poem, a pretty well-known poem by Martin Niemöller, who is famous for having said that when they started with the communists, I wasn't a communist, so I did nothing. And then they started with the socialists. And I realized at that point that we'd been so busy talking about what should be done and how bad this was, that we'd done nothing, and by the time it really affected us, it was too late. But I got involved in the battle at that point, got involved in working with some of the special groups that existed, some of the mainstream groups. I'm sure all of you out there are real familiar with the chicken boners and some of the other folks that were a little on the crazy side, but we're going to fight the spam. But I got involved in the ways that I could. Number one, as a major ISP, I had the ability to be able to look at the source of spam, and in the early days it was much easier. And nothing gave me more pleasure than being able to walk over to a patch panel and literally pull out the plug and disconnect the spammer. And as the chairman of the board of the company, it was quite easy to do. That changed in 1997 when we sold Genuity and became part of GT Internetworking. And there were attorneys and all kinds of processes, and a lot of the fun went out of actually stopping the spammers, a lot of the reward. But the fight still continued on. There was still an ongoing acceleration in terms of spam, and it bothered not just me, but a number of the people who are actually over in Ireland at the moment. And we had discussions and looked at ways of doing things. Amongst those was the great idea that Paul Vixie, who I assume is there at the moment, if not, tip of the hat to Paul, who had developed the idea of having a real-time black hole list, or the RBL, and he developed the MAPS RBL. I decided to support that, and I provided a little bit of financial support. But of course, very rapidly, as everyone knows, a lawsuit was filed by a company called Exactus, and we all got dragged into the fight, and I ponied up a little bit more money for defending the lawsuit. I wasn't very good technically, and then also found myself one day sitting in a room of attorneys being deposed as part of the lawsuit, and that was a wake-up call to some of us as well. So that was sort of the major climb into understanding the issues with spam and trying to do something about it, and realizing how big the battle was going to be.
Hi there, I'm Paul Vixie. I'll try and keep this short. When I first met Rodney in 1994 or so, I thought he was just another random business guy trying to break into the ISP market that was just then booming. I eventually realized that he's an incredibly thoughtful person, much more so than is normal in the technology community. So we've worked on an IP backbone together. We have fought spam together, done considerable amount of internet governance and policy work together. And from that, I've learned to pay special attention to everything Rodney says, down to his word choices, and to pay special attention to everything he does, especially paying attention to the paths he did not choose. Now, of special interest to the MAAWG audience, Rodney was the only registered grown-up in the anti-spam community at the time that the Direct Marketing Association decided that a global opt-out list was the right way to proceed. And now the devil in those details is that there would have been a lot more spam for all of us, and there would have been no legal way to block most of it. So Rodney gathered us together, the flamingest rabble of the anti-spam community of mid to late 1990s, and he dressed us nicely, and he taught us manners, and he put us in a room with the DMA leadership team. We would certainly not have belonged in that room without his guidance. So this was not the last time, by a long shot, that I have learned by watching, and that Rodney has taught by example. So I'm thankful to him for that. So what can I say? I am proud to call Rodney Joffe my friend, and no one could deserve this award more.
Wow, okay. Well, what would you say were some of the pivotal events that occurred after the spam blew up that you recall?
So I think the next big thing was I've been a card-carrying member of the Direct Marketing Association. No booze, please. But have been a card-carrying member of the DMA since 1977, 1980. And as many of you know, I run a direct marketing computer service bureau called American Computer Group. And we process name and address files for traditional postal mail for marketing. When we started going after people who were spamming some of the large traditional enterprises, one of the things that as a community got discussed quite often was how do we show them the correct way to do things? What is the right way to develop a direct marketing program that used email? Because clearly email does have a useful mechanism for providing marketing. And because I was the one that actually had a direct mail bureau and I had a background in it, the group of people in the industry basically came to me and said, why don't you create a system that ensures that people are able to market in the right way? And that's using something called closed loop marketing or confirmed opt-in. In other words, where people don't get email unless they actually confirm that they want to receive it. So at American Computer Group, which by then was called White Hat, whitehat.com, I did two things. First of all, I put together an advisory board for that. And that involves some of the people who are in the audience today, people like Paul Vixie and John Levine and Ray Everett Church and Dave O'Donnell and I forget who else was on it. I apologize if I've forgotten some of the names. And we put together an advisory board and then designed a system that would make sure that a company that wanted to actually develop a direct marketing program using email would do it without running afoul of not the rules, because there weren't any rules in those days, there were also no laws, but just the best practices and the appropriate etiquette for email. No surprise, maybe 5 or 10 companies ever used that system. But what it was able to prove was that, number one, there is a system, but number two, if you put those systems in place, no one wanted to play by the rules. And so the Direct Marketing Association got into the field, of course, 5,000 or 6,000 members, all of the biggest mailers, lots of money. And the chairman of the DMA at the time, a man by the name of Bob Winson, who I'd known for quite a while, had been talking within the DMA about developing a program that would make it easier for direct mail companies to use email, making use of what he called an opt-out program, which was supposed to be modeled after the telephone preference service and the mail preference service, which is if you don't want to receive email or you don't receive regular mail or phone calls, you can go to one central location, put your phone number in or your name and address, and all the members of the DMA would then suppress it. The problem, of course, with email is that the scale is much larger, and it doesn't work that way because of immediate costs. The DMA and Bob Winson had no interest in confirmed opt-in. So knowing that that was happening because I was an insider in the DMA, I then sat down one evening, thought about it, and I developed something called Safe EPS. And many of you in the audience, they will hopefully remember that safeeps.com. It created all kinds of ruckus at the time, a lot of controversy, but I thought it out very carefully. And what I created was something that would be able to be used as the single canonical confirmed opt-out list. In other words, someone would be able to provide their email address, and if they did, it would provide a service where mailers could send their email lists to us. We'd run it through the system, and we'd identify which people had said, I don't want to get email, and we'd send the file back cleaned of those people and just with people who said they do want to receive email. The quirk over here was that I, of course, understand the internet, and I also allowed, knowing that, that one of the premises that we had in that world was my domain, my network, my rules. If I owned a domain name, a corporate domain name, for example, I had the right to say, I don't want any unsolicited email coming to anyone in my company or my domain name. It's mine. I pay for the resources. I pay for the network. Within probably 2 or 3 days of establishing that system, I think there was something like 50 or 60 million email addresses that were referenced in this list that had opted out. Some of them were individuals, but most of them were the domain owners, companies that owned a domain name who chose to do it. A couple of small networks at the time. AOL was one of the first ones to opt out, all of AOL. And then I think Mindspring and Earthlink and Microsoft, and a tip of the hat to all of you in the audience who were able to make that happen. But I was able to put together a system and a list that would allow people to get rid of individuals who'd actually said I want to receive email. Of course, it took away most of the universe.
Right.
And immediately, the bad guys, and even some of the good guys, began to ignore using the opt-out list. That what I had done was I'd been able to prove that there is no way in the world that a single, supported by both sides, opt-out email preference list could ever work. I was able to prove that having the master opt-out list, if it existed, it would absolutely not be used by most people. They would just go ahead and want to spam to the heart's content. But an important thing about the Safe EPS list is that it allowed us very, very rapidly to be able to put pressure on the DMA, who I knew from my membership were about to announce in, I think, November, December of 1998, that they were going to be announcing the fact that they were going to launch a email preference service. But theirs, of course, didn't have domain-wide opt-out. It required individuals, and it was going to be valid for only a few months, and it was going to require you to opt out of categories. When Safe EPS came out, of course, it just cut the legs out from under the DMA because it was supported by a lot of the major networks and ISPs at that point. And so what I was able to do was put pressure on the DMA, and I put together a summit that many of you may remember, somewhere around Christmas in 1998. And a lot of us came to Washington, D.C., came to the DMA's office, and sat down with Bob Winson and Jerry Sarasal and a couple of other people and said, let's talk this through. Let's find a way of making this work for everyone. We had a very interesting afternoon with Bob Winson, who insisted that email was a wonderful way of marketing. He'd come out of Procter & Gamble, and he said it's a very important thing to use. And people should have the right to choose for themselves, not to have it chosen for them by their company or by someone like AOL. And more important than that, he came up with a very, very famous quote, which is quoted in many people's signatures today, which is, everyone should have one bite of the apple. And when you did the math and you realized that in the United States, there were, I think, 25 million companies identified by the Small Business Administration, that theoretically 25 million companies would have the chance under the DMA's plan to send you one email. And if you said at the end of that email, I don't want to get any more from you, they would take you off. But he didn't stop to think about the fact that each of us getting 25 million emails would be an impossible task to actually filter out. It had no possibility of actually working from a scale point of view, and it would ultimately make spam the common way of doing things, and would actually ruin email. So we had this battle, we had the summit, came away with some negotiating. The DMA didn't really stick to it, which we didn't expect, but at least we could show that we had tried to be reasonable.
Well, after the DMA thing, what would you say was the next big watershed moment for you after that?
Well, certainly for me, after the DMA events, I had started to look at spammers who were spamming in general and looking for ways to apply the law to spammers. In fact, all of us were talking about it. I think John Levine in his talk a year or two ago had talked about the TCPA. I had started to actually build almost a cottage industry. I got really upset at all of the junk faxes I was getting. And I started going after the junk faxes in my area, who would fax to me in Phoenix. And I got good enough at it that I think the second Tuesday of every month in our local Smalls Claims Court was known as Rodney Joffe Day. The court had gotten used to me. I filed probably 15 or 20 claims every week in small claims. There's like a 4-week period during which the other party can object or move it out of that. And if they didn't, we got a court time. It's half-hour blocks. And the first block was at 8 a.m. in the morning. And from 8 a.m. until 1:30 or 2, every half hour, I would sit in court, and I would sit in the same, in the complainants table, and a group of people would come in and would sit down, and many times during the headlights, and I would go through the case law, and most times I would win. It became a lot easier, interestingly enough, when the magistrate, who was a retired Marine colonel, very early on, a national pizza chain, had sent me a junk fax, and I sued them, and they arrived in court, and they had their attorney and a local executive, and they were very indignant. And in this thing, they claimed that they had not sent the fax, and I had the copies of the fax and had all the evidence and had gone through the case, and of course the magistrate got a copy of it. And when the executive from the company said, we never send these faxes out unsolicited, he couldn't hold back. And he actually sat there and pulled up the thing. He said, "Don't ever say that. I got this exact same fax at my machine at home that's provided by the court in order for me to sign subpoenas. I know you guys sent the fax unsolicited because I never ordered it. I don't eat pizza." And from that day onwards, he was my best ally. I mean, we had a really good thing going. We would chat in between the cases as people came in and came out, and he would go through. He already knew the questions to ask. He knew that I had the evidence. He knew that the case law was on my side. Went through, and I think during that year, in like 2000, beginning of 2001, I probably ended up with somewhere in excess of $100,000 in awards against some very, very big companies and against some small companies as well who were out there faxing. The problem, of course, is that we weren't in those days able to go after the company that was doing the junk faxing. The law actually said it was the beneficiaries. So it was a lot of innocent people. And some of those people, small companies who really didn't know, I would forgive the judgment. But I was making a point together with many other people. So that was quite a big thing for me. What then happened is that I got spammed by someone by the name of Damon Rothman, who was a regular spammer and became pretty well known, and he was pretty arrogant and was making a lot of money. And what he did was he used mailorder.com, which is one of my domain names, as the return for some spam that he sent out. And I got really upset because I was being blamed for the spam, because it looked like it was coming from me, and it wasn't. Right. So I decided to branch out into suing spammers, something that you're told. I think it was another thing that John Levine had said, that it's expensive to sue spammers, but I was very fortunate. I'd been fortunate in business, and I decided to go and do this for the good guys. And so I went after Damon Rothman. I hired Pete Wellborn, who's one of the best attorneys in the spamming world, and hired him and went after Damon Rothman. And it didn't take too long before Damon Rothman ended up doing two things. First of all, filing personal bankruptcy to protect himself from the awards and the win. And secondly, he signed a document that was published where he apologized for all of his spamming and for doing all the bad things and promising to never do it again. So I consider that to be a great win and something worthwhile. The next thing that happened after that, though, was going back to Niemöller's poem. In 2001, I got a cell phone text spam, SMS spam. Didn't know it was a spam. It was the first one that I'd had. I was actually at a show, and I stepped out of the show, saw the message, realized that it wasn't meant for me. It had someone else's name. It was talking about mortgage rate cut. And I thought, this is important for someone. And so I actually went and looked up the phone number and called the company and said, you obviously meant this for someone else. I know it's probably timely because they've had mortgage rate cut. Just want you to know that you got the wrong person. Went back to the show and didn't think anything more of it. About 4 or 5 weeks later, I got another one. I thought, this is odd, because it's a different message to a different person, but still to my cell phone. So I started to ask around among some of the technical groups. And some of you may have been around at the time, and you may also have gotten it. But I realized that there were hundreds of people that I knew in the mailing list who were getting exactly the same thing. And I realized this was just, junk faxes and then spam all over again. Right. And I decided in this case, when they said, first they went after the socialists, said, I'm not a socialist, but I'm going to go after this and I'm going to protect the other people. And I immediately filed a lawsuit. It was very difficult because cell phone texting was still very new. There was no law to cover it. But I knew a whole lot about the TCPA, which was this federal law that covers junk faxes and telemarketing, unsolicited telemarketing. And so I decided to find a way of articulating an argument against cell phone spam, as if it was, and as far as I was concerned, it was covered by the TCPA. The company that I sued was a company called Acacia National Mortgage, big mortgage company in the Southeast. And they decided, they knew nothing about me. They didn't realize I'd sold Genuity to a public company, that I was relatively comfortable, that I was not really unemployed. I was semi-retired and just enjoying myself. And that I could probably afford to sue them for quite a while. So in order to try and punish me, they moved the case from small claims court to the superior court, which requires an attorney. You can't appear for yourself. Requires an attorney and costs a lot of money. And they countersued me for $50,000. That was the luckiest day that I ever had, because now I could actually turn it into a class action lawsuit. And I'd identified that there were 90,000 blocks, there were 90,000 cell phones that had been spammed by this company. Cell phones were still in blocks of 10,000, there wasn't number portability. And so there were 9 different blocks around Arizona that I'd been able to verify had been spammed, different carriers. Waited until we got into Superior Court, and then went through the process with the judge and asked for certification for a class action. It's already a long story, but I'm going to cut it real short now. 4 or 5 years later, the Arizona Supreme Court certifies the class, judgment of $135 million, and the mortgage company is out of business and gone. So I've in all this time had maybe 10 or 15 cell phone spams since 2001. Noise.
Hi, I'm John Levine. I'd like to spend a couple of minutes talking to you about my friend Rodney Joffe. I could talk for hours about Rodney, and although it wouldn't be boring, it would be too long. So I'm going to keep it down to 3 separate anecdotes. Shortly after the spam summit that other people have probably told you about, the Direct Marketing Association had this fabulous idea to do an opt-out list for email, since they already had an opt-out list for paper mail and it worked pretty well. They figured, well, people can simply say, if I don't want these valuable offers, I'll tell the DMA, and then we'll just tell all the mailers and everything will be great. And we all thought that was the stupidest idea we ever heard. But Rodney actually took action. Rodney had his company build his own opt-out list, which he did much faster than the contractor that the DMA hired. And a key difference was that he allowed people to register their whole domain. So like the first people who registered with Rodney's list was AOL. So they said any AOL.com address can't get spam, or at least can't get it if they follow this list. And the DMA was horrified. Like, how can you speak for all your users? And they say, well, we're a business, it's our rules, our system. So not surprisingly, nobody used Rodney's list and nobody used the DMA's list, but Rodney's list proved that it was a bad idea. So that later on, when the Canned Spam Act came along, although it had a lot of bad ideas in it, at least that was one bad idea that it didn't have. And it was really Rodney that proved that you didn't want to do that. Okay, now a second unrelated thing is he went off and started another company called Ultra DNS, which is still around, and provides domain name service to big companies. And in fact, is now merged into Newstar, the company that runs .us and .biz. And I had no idea of the security stuff he was doing until I sort of wandered up in a meeting and he was talking to some other people. And this was years ago, before people were concerned about denial of service attacks. You know, and Rodney had put together an entire private network to connect the large domain servers that he ran to the large clients, you know, large ISPs, specifically so that if somebody attacked the ISPs or if they attacked him over the regular internet, then the DNS would continue to run over this private system so that websites would continue to work. You know, and this was really very, very far-sighted. This was years before DNS, denial of service attacks, were on anybody's radar. You know, so again, Rodney proved that it could be done, and now it's sort of a standard feature of anybody who does large DNS. So those are both sort of related to his businesses. But a third thing is, because of Rodney, text message spam is illegal, and it's entirely because of him. In 1991, the government passed an act called the TCPA that said it's illegal to make pre-recorded phone calls and it's illegal to make junk faxes. And in 2001, a mortgage company emailed Rodney's cell phone. Remember, your cell phone has an email address that will typically turn into a text message, or at least it did then. And it showed up on his cell phone, and he said, you know, to get this cheap mortgage. And Rodney said, well, that's spam. So he filed a TCPA lawsuit in a court in Arizona in 2001, and then in 2002, he won, and of course the other side appealed. You know, and this went on for years and years and years and years until finally in 2005, you know, with Rodney paying for all of his own legal expenses, the Arizona Court of Appeals went back and said that, yeah, the text messages are equivalent to junk phone calls, and the same law that says you can sue people for junk phone calls means you can sue people for junk texts. And again, you know, junk phone calls haven't gone away, junk texts haven't gone away, but simply the knowledge and the court precedent, which is important in this country, that junk texts are illegal. And at least one guy has persuaded a court that if you send junk texts, everybody who gets one can sue you for $500, which adds up quickly when you send a lot of them. You know, so I think those three things sort of show both the scope of the stuff that Rodney's done, and also, you know, it's all his public service interest. I mean, he was never going to make any money from that opt-out list, you know, and he didn't have to do the DNS stuff, and he certainly didn't have to put all that effort into that one, at the time, very exotic court case. I mean, I read people reviewing it, and they said, this is weird, you know, this is not what the law anticipated. Like, oh, this is going to be really bad for junk mailers, and we're thinking, yeah. So that, yeah, is how we feel about Rodney, and we are so pleased to give him this award today.
The third thing that went on in that period was the rise of malware and botnets to actually send spam. And as the founder of Ultra DNS, and because DNS is used by botnets in a big way, I started to dedicate the time that I had to working with the rest of the guys in the audience in order to go after the guys behind botnets and to be able to disrupt them as much as I could. And so a lot of my life between then and now has been involved in migrating from understanding botnets through DNS to understanding other things. A big thing, though, in terms of what I do is I'm not the smart guy in the room. I'm really the dumb guy that carries the bags. But fortunately, in those bags, I have a little bit of money. So my role has really been carrying the bags of money to help whenever I can when folks in the community want things. I'm really happy to be able to do that kind of thing. So those are the things that I really do. I'm not, like most of the people in the audience, are really good at actually understanding spam and fighting and things like that. I'm not any of those things. You can't have I couldn't have an intelligent conversation about the techniques and methods that I use. But I think where I can contribute, and I've contributed up until now and hope to continue contributing, is to be able to sit on the side and when someone says, we can't do that because we can't get at the right people, we can't get at the right resources, we can't have a meeting, I'm happy to go and to get involved. Conficker is a good example of that. Needed someone who would actually rally together what turned out to be over 115 countries, people from 115 countries and thousands of people, someone to actually become a spokesman or mouthpiece to encourage that and to force the US government to take notice and try and deal with the problem. Conficker turned out to be a wonderful exercise, best practices, still quoted today, and we model a lot of the stuff we do on Conficker. I didn't create the Conficker Working Group. Just once it was going and people knew what was needed, I got suckered in, well, I got asked very nicely if I would chair the group, but that was only, I think, because I knew people and I could make phone calls to people in high places and say, you need to look at this and you need to make these changes. And I was able to do that. So I've been able to, I think, make contributions in that way that really pale in significance next to the people that really develop the techniques and write the code and stop spam from actually just killing everyone, literally.
Well, I have two questions. One, since you have all this money, is can I have a loan? Probably not.
Take a number. There's people all over.
Well, I'm in the room with you, so I'm gonna jump in the front of the line with that one. But the second one, more serious, is we talked a little bit about the past. So where do you kind of see the future of this whole thing going?
Unlike a lot of the people, probably in the audience today, I'm not optimistic for being to solve the problem. I saw what happened with junk faxes, and I saw what happened with the beginning of spam, and I realized that the guys that we're fighting are better than we are. They've got the same skill sets, but they don't have any kind of moral filter or compass like we do. So it's not a level playing field, and until there's a level playing field, we can't possibly win. We can try and control it. We can start to limit capabilities, but we really are killing the dream of the internet. As some of the people know, John Postel was my business partner. John is one of the fathers of the internet, and many of you still have to deal with the things that he developed today. He was IANA. He was the RFC editor, one of the wisest men that I know. He was a great mentor of mine. The bad guys don't play by those rules. And it's going to be very, very difficult. I think until we get to a point where law enforcement globally is coordinated, so we don't have these little outposts where the bad guys can hide, until we have law enforcement globally seeing this as a challenge, and as a group being prepared to go after the bad guys and put them in jail, until that is the norm, I think that you're going to continue to have people that wake up one morning and say, hey, here's a way of making money. The younger kids today have all of the skill sets, and it's natural for them. And I think it's going to be an ongoing battle. So where I think things are going are that we're going to continue to have an industry. Folks in the audience are going to continue to work really hard. We'll keep making a difference. The bad guys will climb over the walls that we build. And we're going to have to keep battling until there's a catastrophic event, and I know it's going to happen. I dread it, but I know there's going to be a catastrophic event as a result of malware distributed via spam or botnets or whatever it is. And at that point, the world might get religion. I just wish that would happen without that. But I have no doubt it's going to happen. It's going to happen, within the next 2 or 3 years. And at that point, I think we might get some kind of global agreement that this is a bad thing for everyone, and an agreement to actually try and stop it.
I'm going to sleep really well tonight.
I don't mean that to happen. So just in finishing, because I know we're starting to run out of time, and I know I stand between a lot of you and either the next meal or the pint of Guinness, which I wasn't able to bring with because I'm currently prohibited from having Guinness. But if I wasn't, I'd be raising a glass with you and saying thank you very much for selecting me for the Litynski Award. I think it's a wonderful award. I'm very proud of it. It's one of the nicest things that ever happened to me. So I appreciate it, and I hope that even though this is a Lifetime Achievement Award, the downside was that when I was first approached, I thought that it was because people had decided, you know, he's over the hill and he may not make it through the next year and he's done all the good he possibly can. I'd like to think that I can continue to still do some good. So don't count me out yet. Thank you and have a great time in Ireland.
One of the things that they asked me to do was formally present you with the Mary Litynski Award. So, Rodney Joffe, well deserved.
Thank you very much. So, heavy as anything, solid and a beautiful color, and obviously I'm really honored to have to be receiving it. So thank you very much.
Well deserved.